Between 1956 and 1964, Klein was able to produce 4 books that profiled 4 major cities and demonstrated consistently amazing work, which is an outstanding feat for any street photographer, past or present. While street photography might be what he's most well known for today, he also shot fashion and portraits, made films and paintings, and created some truly new and unique styles of art. His life was heavily influenced by the time he spent working at Vogue, as well as his interactions with Fellini, Bresson, Muhammad Ali, and Orson Welles. This is Street Smarts Volume 11, William Klein. William Klein was born in Harlem, New York in 1928. His upbringing involved experiencing the arts through cinema, New York's MoMA, the photographs of Edward Weston and Walker Evans, in addition to the work of European avant-garde artists through painting and sculptures. All of these influenced the wide array of different photography and art Klein himself would go on to produce. Klein's relocation from the United States to Europe is something that would prove to be influential in the way that the rest of his life played out. In 1946, once he was old enough to join the army, he did so and was stationed in Germany during the post-World War II era of Reconstruction. It was at this time that he got his first camera, which he won in a poker game. Klein's deployment also led to his arrival in Paris in 1948, where he relocated from that point on, got married, and was able to attend art school from the money provided to him by the GI Bill he received from his years of military service. His paintings were largely angular forms with modern appeal that brought together elements of surrealism, cubism, Dada, and pop art. While being in the midst of the era's modernist rhetoric that had rigid guidelines of what art could or could not be, Klein found working in many different ways to be more enticing. This mentality, along with the ethos from 2 books he aligned himself with, would eventually work its way into his photography. One of these books was titled Language of Vision, which has become a staple in the world of arts education, because it attempts to reevaluate how art is looked at by modern eyes in terms of newer mediums that have become available in modern times, and how to evaluate those mediums through laws of visual organization. The other text was a book called Vision in Motion, which examined the interrelationship between art and technology, and had an impact not only on William Klein, but also the world of film, photography, painting, literature, and science. Through everything Klein was learning about art during his time in Paris, he developed his own work, which was put on display in exhibitions in Brussels and Milan, which were becoming centers for new art movements. It was here that Klein began to receive recognition from the world of architects who claimed he epitomized the growing alignment of advanced art, design, and architecture. What he learned about art was pushed even further when Klein created an installation of paintings that could be moved around in ways that allowed them to be shown in 2,800 different configurations. Klein documented this piece through long exposures, which sparked in his mind the potential for a new abstract art that relied on a darkroom, enlarger, and photo paper. Well, a variation of this art had been developed during the 1920s called photograms that involved placing objects under an enlarger to create shapes on photo paper. Klein changed this by using paper with shapes cut into them, moving the shapes around the paper, and creating long exposures that were something truly new and unique, combining art and technology in ways that his readings had pushed him to explore. He explored this further by adding paint and overlaid gels to make something even more appealing to look at. All of this laid the foundation for the type of artistic experimentation that Klein would use to some degree throughout the rest of his career. Klein used painting on his contact sheets to show photography in a completely new way that was fun and energetic, while continuing to combine his philosophy of technology, photography, and painting into an almost new medium. The idea that caused Klein to create these painted contacts was to showcase them in a video form as a way of exploring his hits and misses, shown in a way that allowed people to digest which photos a photographer took that worked and which ones did not. His conception was to have a camera track along a strip of contacts, stopping at the chosen image with a commentary from the photographer explaining why, for him, that frame was successful. As the camera moved forward, you'd see the misses, the nothing photos, and then the hit. These were done on enamel paint and featured the chosen selects along with the discarded frames, giving audiences a chance to see all of the work the photographer did in conjunction with the favored frame. Klein took a stint away from Paris to photograph where he grew up. It is through his photos of Harlem that we see Klein's interactions with these communities. Many photographers attempt to capture the decisive moment unnoticed by the subjects within the frame, as many were and still are influenced by the work of Henri Cartier-Bresson. There's a beautiful irony in the fact that Klein attempted to do the exact opposite of this while using a camera he purchased in Paris from Bresson himself. Unlike other street photographers who attempt to remain invisible to their subjects, Klein interacted with them, sometimes documenting what was happening, sometimes photographing staged or performed scenes. Some of Klein's most famous shots from New York fall into the staged category. On the company dime, he was able to afford darkroom equipment that he set up in his bathroom, which allowed him to create tons of prints and evolve a style that involved extreme cropping in some cases to capture the most vibrant parts of the frame. During his time in New York, he worked without restrictions and captured photos of everything and anything that caught his eye, and claimed that his anything goes anti-technique way of shooting, in addition to his wild cropping techniques, suited him and went against the grain in terms of what was considered a good photograph. I had a particular kind of double vision. One, almost Parisian, the other, an incorrigible, wise-ass New Yorker. I realized that whatever culture shock I fled would wear off eventually, so I went to town and photographed non-stop, with literal vengeance. I'd hit a vein, I had to do the book, take everything I learned as a painter with my own New York craziness, and let loose. His unruly exposure, focus, and motion blur were all used to create hectic frames that exude energy, and a loud, frantic chaos that could be seen throughout the majority of his work, and is said to have heavily influenced the work of Japanese street photographers, which is evident when you look at the work of Daido Moriyama from the past, or more contemporary photographers like Tetsuo Suzuki. Moriyama specifically claims Klein's Tokyo as his Bible, and stated, "I tirelessly browsed through the pages of Klein's photographs, which ultimately helped me determine the direction of my own endeavors. As a result, I went straight ahead on the road to becoming a street snap photographer." Oddly enough, it's Klein's abstract photography that introduced him into the world of fashion photography, when the director of American Vogue saw one of his exhibitions in the summer of 1954. During their first meeting, Klein showed a series of barn photos that he had been working on that was later published in Vogue and led to him being invited to work for the magazine's New York office. Prior to this, Klein had wanted to continue to focus on graphic design applications in architecture and confessed to having little experience taking photography seriously. Lieberman, the director of Vogue since 1941, convinced Klein of his photographic potential, and this became the jumping-off point for much of Klein's photography work. First assigned to still life, he was given funding to photograph the city, with the promise that the photos could be run in the magazine. At the same time, his career evolved into filmmaking and creating books that focused on cities around the world. He was also pushed into working with actual models instead of still life by Lieberman at Vogue. Even though Klein had not experienced full-blown fashion photography up to that point, Lieberman knew that Klein would try something new and different, which was exactly what he was looking for. And he wasn't let down. Klein was seen to revitalize the fashion photography industry. Klein had reverence for fashion photographers who were at the height of the industry, but wouldn't consider using their techniques himself. In Klein's words, he chose to use new techniques, plus graphic design, plus slapstick, plus soap opera, plus new dada, plus pre-pop, plus post-anything goes. To change things, Klein intentionally blew up his photos to increase the noticeability of the grain, used long exposure to create light paintings around his models, and used the ideas of his models to create more unpredictable shoots. I accepted the obligation of showing the clothes, sharp, all the buttons, pleats, and whatever. As long as I did that, I found I could do pretty much what I wanted with the rest. Backgrounds, attitude, situations, whatever. I guess the editors didn't care as long as the readers didn't flip the page too fast. After spending time in New York, Klein moved on to Rome. This idea came to him after he had a meeting in Paris with the legend of Italian film, Federico Fellini, who directed La Dolce Vita, La Strada, and 8½. Fellini told Klein that he owned his previous book, was a fan of his work, and that he should consider coming to Rome to be an assistant on one of his films. Upon his arrival in Italy, Klein became aware of the fact that Fellini already had multiple assistants, and that he wasn't really needed for the production. So he decided to work on another book. That book would be titled Rome, the City and Its People. When it was released, while Fellini was working on La Dolce Vita, he gave the quote claiming, "This book could be a film, and someday, I hope I will do it." Anyhow, this is the best Rome there is, and Klein is the best photographer there is. He knows Rome like a book, and this is it. After my time in Rome, when I made a book that I felt really said something about Italian culture, I was on a roll, and I felt I could work pretty much anywhere. During the Cold War years that Klein visited Moscow, it was incredibly hard for outsiders to visit the USSR. During his visits to Moscow, some of his photography was done on supervised trips, while others were allowed to be created in regular everyday situations. The photos he created in these scenarios were not unlike ones he had created throughout the rest of the world in terms of their technique, and Klein truly was on a roll, as this quickly led to the creation of another book. In Japan, they have to manage, to arrange sending a present to a guy to ask for a favor, and then the guy sends back a present. This takes forever, I discovered, so I thought, well, f that. I'll just walk around and do what I want. In a continuation of his jet setting that was becoming a regular part of Klein's life, during the same years that he was visiting Moscow, Klein was invited to visit Tokyo by Fuji. On this trip, he photographed hair salons, calligraphy classes, tea ceremonies, geisha homes, department stores, public protest, and modern dance that was taking place on the streets. A book covering this trip, simply titled Tokyo, was quickly put together and released. If you got anything out of this, please like, comment, and subscribe, and until next time, keep developing.